The House Republican Policy Committee will come to order. Representative Twardzik, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
All rise and table, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is David Rowe. I have the pleasure of serving as state representative for the 85th Legislative District that covers Union, Snyder, Juniata, and Mifflin counties. I also have the honor of serving as the chairman of the Republican House Policy Committee. I want to start off by thanking the Higgins Township building for hosting us here today. This is a beautiful building. It was a beautiful drive down here. Got stuck behind a truck going most of the way, and you don't have a whole lot of passing lanes around here, but still we made it on time. So thank you very much. We're going to start off, let the members introduce themselves, starting with Representative Stehr.
Hi, Representative Stehr from the 107th District. Thank you so much for coming.
Good morning. I'm Tim Twardzik from the beautiful 123rd District, Schuylkill County. It's great to hear important news about an important industry.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name's Representative Jamie Barton. I serve the 124th Legislative District. That's eastern and southern Schuylkill County and northern Berks.
We're also joined online by Representative Dallas Kephart from Clearfield County. Thank you, Representative Kephart, for being here. And we also have Evelyn Dottie from Representative Dan Muse's office. Thank you very much, Evelyn, for being here today. We're going to start off with some opening remarks from Representative Joanne Stehr.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you all for joining us here in Schuylkill County at the Higgins Township building located in the 107th District, which I am honored to represent. As the host of today's hearing, I appreciate everyone taking the time to be part of this important conversation about the regulatory and cost challenges facing Pennsylvania mining industry. Mining has long played a vital role in our region and across the Commonwealth. It supports good-paying jobs, strengthens local economies, and provides essential materials to our industry and communities rely on every day. At the same time, we recognize the landscape for this industry has become increasingly complex. With growing regulatory requirements and rising costs that impact competitiveness, investments, and long-term planning. Today's hearing provides an opportunity to hear directly from these working in and alongside the industry. We'll hear about permitting timelines, compliance costs, the real-world effects these factors have on operation and workforce stability. Just as importantly, we will discuss the ideas of improving efficiency, modernization processes, and ensuring that Pennsylvania remains competitive while maintaining strong protections for workers, communities, and the environment. I look forward to a constructive and open discussion as we listen carefully, ask thoughtful questions, and consider practical solutions and support both economic growth and responsible stewardship. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their time and expertise. I also want to thank everyone in attendance for your interest and engagement in this issue. Your perspective is essential, and we work through these challenges together. With that, let's get started. Chairman Rowe.
Thank you, Representative Stehr. I'm very excited to talk today about the challenges and opportunities that this industry is facing. It's important to ground ourselves, I think, in the history of the anthracite coal here in Pennsylvania, especially in places like Schuylkill County. Anthracite coal powered some of the most defining chapters of American growth, from heating homes all across the Northeast in the 19th and early 20th centuries to fueling iron and steel production, helping build the rails, bridges, and infrastructure that connected a growing nation. It powered steam locomotives that provided energy for factories during the Industrial Revolution, truly anchoring Pennsylvania as a manufacturing powerhouse, and the industry supported entire local economies. And while we recognize the industry's legacy, it's important to be clear-eyed about where things do stand today. The scale of the industry has declined significantly, and many of the communities that once depended on coal have faced economic hardship, population loss, and the difficult transition that comes with shifting industries. And that's why conversations like we're having here today matter. Because as we think about energy, workforce, economic development, we're not starting from scratch. We're building on a history that powered a nation while recognizing the need to create new opportunities for the communities that carry this wonderful legacy. So I'm very grateful. We have several excellent testifiers here today. We have Dave Williams, who's the owner at Dave Williams Associates, Sean Fry, who's the chief engineer for Blashock Anthracite, Abigail Desiker, perfect, operations engineer also for Blashock Anthracite, and we have Dwayne Fagley, who's the executive director of the Pennsylvania Anthracite Council. We're going to have you guys started off with some testimony, 3 to 5 minutes, a little bit more if you need it. Then we're going to take it to members for some questions. So, Mr. Williams, you're up first.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name's Dave Williams. I have almost 50 years of experience of being a mining engineer. I'm a Penn State graduate. 16 years of that 50 years is with the Pennsylvania Department of Deep Mine Safety. Last 6 years I've been in industry again, and I've been classified as an expert witness in county, state, and federal court. I've also testified in front of the environmental hearing a couple times too. So I am here to talk to you gentlemen here about the current implementation of the environmental justice policy is impacting the mining operations and more broadly the economic viability of the communities in which we operate. Also, the burden of anthracite underground coal mine operations having to deal with a federal and a state agency performing the same safety functions. And finally, the impact on the proposed mining operations from the Pennsylvania National Diversity Inventory Program, which is also known as PNDI. So I'm going to start out with the Environmental Justice Framework and Authority. Environmental justice, as currently implemented, is not achieving its stated goals and in some cases is harming the very communities it intends to protect. The Department of Environmental Protection's Office of Environmental Justice operates pursuant to executive order and internal policy guidance, not through statutory authority enacted by the General Assembly. Policies with significant economic and permitting consequences are being implemented through DEP's processes with explicit legislative authorization, clear statutory standards, or formal legislative oversight. While DEP has statutory authority, the environmental justice framework is influencing permitting outcomes, timelines, project viability in ways that raise concerns regarding transparency, consistency, and accountability. Now, the lack of economic development focus. The governor's executive order identifies economic development as a core responsibility of environmental justice. However, the current DEP policy contains no meaningful framework to promote economic growth in these communities, and without focus on economic opportunity, environmental justice risks being a barrier rather than a benefit. Important item coming up, exclusion of key stakeholders. The anthracite industry is a key stakeholder, yet it has no significant meaning in environmental justice. The Environmental Justice Advisory Board lacks representation from industry, even though its bylaws state there needs to be a representation from industry. A process intended to ensure fairness must include all affected stakeholders involved. Now, the use of inaccurate data. Different municipalities are classified as environmental justice district based on information, some of it supplied by the Penn Enviro screen tool, which municipalities are considered then, if they reach a certain level, they are considered an environmental justice zone. It relies on outdated and sometimes inaccurate data, including sites that have already been reclaimed. Policy decisions with real economic consequences should not be based on unreliable data. Public participation and delays. Enhanced public participation has resulted in excessive delays, in some cases over 3.5 or more years. These delays directly impact jobs, investment, and business viability. Anthracite is an environmental solution. Anthracite mining contributes significantly to environmental remediation by reclaiming abandoned mine lands and improving water quality at no cost to the taxpayer. DEP permits are classified as mining and reclamation permits. Market-based solutions. Market-driven approaches can achieve environmental goals while supporting economic growth. Now, the second subject that I would like to speak about is the duplication of underground mine safety inspections by state DEP Anthracite Mine Safety Division and the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration. There's a duplication of these inspections that anthracite underground coal mine operators must deal with a state and federal agency that perform the same function of mine safety. During the inspection of an anthracite underground coal mine, an operator will accompany a federal mine inspector during his inspection of the mine. The operator will then also have to accompany a state mine inspector during his inspection of the mine, basically doing the same function. There's a duplication also of plans and regulations. MSHA regulations require a roof support plan and a mine ventilation plan. The information in these plans is duplicated by DEP in a mine opening plan. These plans are revised as conditions change in the mine. The revised plans must be approved by the corresponding agencies to allow the underground coal mine to continue to operate. MSHA regulations are found in CFR 30, Parts 1 to 99, Mineral Resources. These regulations are constantly updated and revisions are made as a result of investigations of mining accidents. DEP's regulations for mine safety are found in Act 346. These regulations were adopted in 1965, and the only revisions that was basically made since then was to make the regulations gender sensitive. The DEP adopted portions of MSHA's 30 CFR Part 77 for safety and became known as 25 PA Code Chapter 209A. This allows for a DEP inspector to enforce the same regulations that an MSHA inspector enforces. The DEP's Act 346 also includes sections of regulations that apply to their very own mine inspectors. Many of these sections are not even being followed. MSHA has resources. The MSHA organization has many resources that cover almost any aspect of underground mine safety. They have numerous training programs, which also include their academy at Beckley, West Virginia. They have testing facilities. They have approval agencies and numerous other portions of their agencies that are well suited to handle any need that the anthracite underground community would need. Other states have been involved with MSHA now. The state of Oklahoma has eliminated their underground mine safety program as of December 2021. Other states, including Colorado and Kentucky, are reviewing their elimination of their underground mine safety program in favor of the MSHA's mine safety program. One thing I missed to say here in the beginning about my experience, I also testified in front of Governor Schweiker's Mine Void Commission too, and provided recommendations, one of them being about scanning all the maps in Pennsylvania, which the state actually then got involved and did scan all the maps. They're available to the public on the POSDA website. Third subject, Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory. The Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory is an environmental review tool used to screen project areas for potential impacts on threatened, endangered, or special concern species and their habitats. The information is to provide current, reliable, objective ecological data and analysis to help guide conservation work and land use planning. There are 4 jurisdictional agencies that participate in the PNDI review of coal mining permits. These agencies include the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation of Natural Resources, the Pennsylvania Game Commission, the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and the United States Fish and Wildlife Services. The review process of a PNDI for a coal mining permit can take a significant amount of time to make a determination. A study by a certified company will be required if a significant species are indicated within 1,000 meters of the proposed permit site. Costs for hiring a certified company capable of studying the significant identified species are very costly. The PennEnviro screen tool is also used in some decision-making there too. As stated before, there are many inaccuracies of the data that this tool relies on. Some Western states have worked with the equivalent agencies and developed programs that place bat bars at mine opening portals to allow for bat habitat. This is done as part of the post-mining program. Also, operators are willing to purchase identified plants of concern to be used as part of the reclamation plan. State nurseries should begin growing these types of plants. Basically, there needs to be cooperation between the government agencies involved and the mining industry to develop alternative and acceptable solutions to these issues. Finally, I have some conclusions and recommendations. I believe they should incorporate economic development into the environmental justice policy. They should ensure the accurate and current data that they're using. They should reform the advisory board representation. They should establish reasonable permitting timelines. They should ensure policies that operate within statutory boundaries. They should eliminate DEP's Anthracite Mine Safety Division and allow MSHA to take over the responsibility in its entirety. should establish a committee with industry representation to work with the 4 jurisdictional agencies that are involved with the PNDI approvals to recommend acceptable solutions for various issues. And finally, create an independent oversight board to review DEP's implementation of regulations and use these results in a yearly basis when having DEP budget hearings. I thank you so much for allowing me to testify this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Fry.
Hi, my name's Sean Fry. I'm a registered professional mining engineer. First came to work in the anthracite industry in 1987 for the Blaschak family, and now work for Blaschak with their current ownership. So I have seen I've been through a lot of the changes that have occurred that affect the financial viability of the anthracite mining industry, and a really big one is the bonding. I do have the relative regulations here. I'm not going to read them in detail, but basically, I think a lot of you were around when we went through full cost bonding. We had a setup for how bonding was calculated. There were lawsuits, and most of the jobs were under bonded. The problem is we've swung so far the opposite direction as to what our bonding is based upon. The consumer price index that's used by the state in the bonding calculations has increased from 2019 on. It's increased by only 25%. But in the same time period, our bond rates have increased by anywhere from, as below, 61.8% to almost 110%. The increase in the bond rates has just not been commensurate with what we experience as operators. So the prevailing wage that's used on bond forfeitures that go through the state program for reclamation, the benefits and wages are 37.8% higher than our local union wages that are negotiated throughout our industry. I realize that these aren't things that are easily changed, but I think what's important, the point that I'm trying to get across is I think we need to look at every possible way that we can to make these bond rates more fair and equitable and workable for the industry. Since revising the permitting process, where we used to submit an annual bond review every year and there would be a bond adjustment, it was too much for the department to keep up with. So they've gone to a system where we review our bonding and update it either every 2.5 years at mid-permit review or every 5 years upon the permit renewal. So the permits get renewed every 5 years. But what they did is they added on a CPI adjustment, and it's the same CPI adjustment that I just referenced. Right now, that CPI adjustment is based on the average of the last 5 years, and it's at 4.17%. What that means is we calculate our bond, and then we have to add on 4.17% for each year. So if we're doing every 5 years a bond renewal, it adds 20% onto our total bond, just right in the front. That's based upon the engineer's expectation and the company as to what our maximum exposure is going to be over the next 5 years. So we have to do all the work, and if our maximum exposure is increasing as we go and it occurs in year 5, we're still putting up the bond for the maximum exposure right there at 0 hour with an extra 20% for this add-on. There's part of me, I'm as much an environmentalist as anybody. And there's part of me that realizes that the bond rates have to cover the cost of reclamation. But this whole system has gotten us to the point where our bonding that we're putting up is becoming one of our main fiscal challenges in just continuing to operate. And it's based upon the small percentage of operators who don't take care of their obligations. So Blaschak has been in business since the 30s, but yet we're bonding at rates to reclaim sites that other operators are failing to take their responsibilities to reclaim. We're sort of, all the operators that are left, that are established and doing the good work are being punished for the companies that don't take care of business. And in the meantime, we also pay the tax on every ton of coal that we mine and sell that goes to the federal fund to reclaim abandoned mine lands. We are the only industry paying that type of tax to pay for the sins of the past that aren't our responsibility. Even for the brownfields, the Superfund, that tax doesn't even exist anymore. The oil and gas industry, the state has been working out plans to reclaim old abandoned gas wells. The oil and gas industry doesn't pay a tax on their production to reclaim them. They don't even bond at a rate that allows for reclamation of the oil and gas wells. Their bonding is well below what that cost is, even for them to reclaim them, let alone for the state. So we also look at, since 1978, over 236,000 acres of abandoned mine lands have been reclaimed under the AMLR program. So that state program that comes from those dollars that we pay taxes into, that then comes back from the federal government to the state to reclaim. And in the same time period, industry has reclaimed about 11 times that acreage, 2.7 million acres. The point is, if we can look at industry and find a way to, within the existing framework, help lessen that bonding burden, we're going to start losing bonding companies soon. I mean, the bonding companies are looking at these amounts. I just had a job in a 5-year period, went from a $15 million bond to a $27 million bond. That was due to the increase in bond rates and the increase in the CPI, not an increase in our exposure on the mining operation. So again, we realize that a change to federal regulations that then passes down to the change in state regulations is it's a tough nut. But any way that we can look at working within the existing framework to try to lessen this burden, I think is very important. And Representative Stehr, you mentioned economic growth and environmental stewardship. This is in our region. This is your districts. It ties right in. We talk about local economic hardship as the mining industry has come down, but we're still one of the highest paying industries in the anthracite region. And I know Dwayne talks about it a lot. Everywhere he talks, how many other industries are supported by the mining industry. What is it? 6 people to 1 mining job or something like that? Or 4?
About 2 to 1.
Is it 2 to 1? It used to be higher, but we've gotten a lot smaller as well. So, but again, we appreciate you listening to us, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. I want to mention we have been joined online by the Vice Chairman of the Policy Committee, Representative Kristen Marcel from Bucks County. Thank you, Representative Marcel, for being here. Ms. Desiker.
Good morning. I'm Abigail Desker. I'm a registered professional mining engineer. I've been an operations engineer with Blashock Anthracite for the past 7 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the issues we have with the coal permitting and non-coal permitting, and the specific segregation of this permitting and how that affects operations moving forward. So under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, the original bonding rates for non-coal mining was significantly lower than that of a coal mining permit. And that led to many coal operators applying for non-coal permits and just selling small amounts of crushed stone to get around those regulations. So it was later amended in 1990 and 1995 to provide definitions for what counts as a coal mining operation and a non-coal mining operation, and what is considered incidental coal mining on a non-coal permit. And those amendments also put in regulatory guardrails to ensure that the proper permits were issued, and gave the regulatory authorities ability to enforce the proper permitting. So under a non-coal permit, if you want to extract incidental coal, you can only do it if it accounts for less than 16 2/3% of the tonnage mined on that site, or less than 50% of the value of material sold on that site. Under a coal permit, the Department of Environmental Protection uses the existing coal reclamation regulations to provide for a framework in which a coal operator could sell non-coal material as aggregates. But they have to go through the process to prove to the department that they have what is considered excess spoil. So say, given this example, if the operator mines 1 million cubic yards in a year, there's a 35% spoil factor, and also taking into account the volume of the coal that's extracted, they would be left with, in excess, 200,000 cubic yards of material. So if they can show those calculations to the department will then write a permit condition where then that operator can sell a maximum of 200,000 cubic yards of material. The problem is that mining companies are trying to maximize the value of every material that they drill, blast, load, and haul. And it makes sense not just for the mining company, but the environment, to minimize the amount of sites that we're opening. Well, the current permitting process does not allow for a coal mine to also produce aggregate and reclaim to grades that are allowed in non-coal mining. In today's anthracite mines, most surface coal operations move over 1 million cubic yards of overburden per year. In many cases, a large percentage of that overburden could be processed to meet local aggregate needs. Aggregates produced from coal mines would reduce the need to mine rock from otherwise unaffected areas, as other opportunities might arise for production of ores, rare earths, or other non-coal minerals that could potentially be extracted from coal mining overburden. The limitations placed on coal or non-coal mining permits are going to have an increasing negative impact on the industry's ability to minimize the mining footprint while still producing our necessary minerals in this area. And so while this is a federal framework that we're working with, what we're looking for is to see if there's a way for our current state regulations and our state agencies to be able to work under that to maximize whatever we can mine under a current given permit. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Desker. Director Fagley.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Dwayne Figley, and I'm Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Anthracite Council. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak to this committee. Just an opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about the anthracite industry is always a plus, and I really appreciate that. I've been with the industry for 30 years now, so I was telling Davey one day, we were talking, I said, you know, we're old timers here right now, Davey and I and Sean. Abby, she's the newcomer here. But anyway, so it's really great to be here. I'm also a graduate of Shippensburg University and a fine product of the public school system of Huntington County, Pennsylvania. If you're familiar with Huntington County, you might be Representative Rowe from that neck of the woods over there, sure. In fact, I bought a dog in Juniata County a couple years ago. Yeah, she died, but she was a great dog while I had her. So anyway, so thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit today about regulations, regulatory process. We're going to talk a little bit about regulatory accumulation. We're going to talk about the birth of a regulation, how a regulation is actually born. We're going to talk about the process through which this regulation is birthed. I'm going to talk about a case study in regulations that you might find a little interesting. And then we're going to talk about today, I'm going to offer up at the end of my talk here, A couple of very simple and actionable recommendations that this committee, that the Republican caucus, the Democrats hopefully can get on board with this, and they would really, I think, would really help the regulatory climate in Pennsylvania significantly. So let's get started. First of all, by definition, the word regulation means a law, rule, or other prescribed authority, especially to regulate conduct. All regulations have one thing in common. They are affecting a private marketplace to create a desired effect or outcome. Common examples of regulations include controls on minimum wages, standards of production of certain products, pollution effects, public and workplace safety, and many others. Many regulations touch our lives in very positive ways every single day we seldom see or consider. However, we live in a very large and complex society. Laws and regulations are necessary for us to function safely, peacefully, and efficiently with one another. We feel the positive effects of regulations every day when we drive to work on roads with traffic controls designed to keep us safe. We enjoy peace of mind when we enter a building constructed to meet safety standards, and we feel confident when we buy food because the manufacturers are required to meet standards to ensure our food is safe to eat. So the question is not whether or not we need regulations to help run our society, but rather how much regulation do we need to maintain the health and welfare of our citizens and the environment we all share. So the question is, when is enough regulation really too much? The real challenge we're facing in society is the problem of regulatory accumulation. According to the Americas Center at George Mason University, in 1997, there were 834,949 instances of the words may not, must, prohibited, shall, and required in the Code of Federal Regulations that serve as a proxy for a number of regulatory restrictions imposed by the U.S. federal government. By 2023, that had grown to approximately 1,090,000 regulatory restrictions, reflecting continued expansion in the size and scope of federal regulations over time. For perspective, the preceding 208 years, going back to 1789, the average rate of increase of regulations in the United States was just 4,013 per year. As regulatory agencies began adding new regulations to an already gargantuan pile of regulations, a couple of things began to happen. First, regulations started to conflict with one another, and more regulations had to be drafted to deal with those conflicts. Second, the cost to individuals and businesses started going up as they met their legal obligations to comply with the regulations. In a more recent edition of the 10,000 Commitments Report, the Competitive Enterprise Institute estimates that the cumulative cost of our nation's citizens to comply with the government regulations to be in the range of $2 trillion annually. While estimates vary, we can all agree that there are significant financial burden imposed on citizens and businesses of the United States to comply with these regulations, and Sean and Dave just talked about some of those just briefly. In addition to the sheer volume of regulations, businesses and individuals must also navigate overlapping regulatory authority. In a situation where multiple agencies have jurisdiction over the same activity, when coordination between federal and state agencies is limited, this overlap creates uncertainty, delays, and increased compliance costs. As noted by Reblog, the greatest regulatory burden does not come from a single rule, but from the cumulative effect of multiple regulations issued by different regulatory agencies over time. Unlike fiscal policy, where impacts can be measured and analyzed, the regulatory landscape remains largely opaque, making it difficult to identify areas of duplication and inefficiencies. The cost of this overlap is significant. But a study by the American Action Forum found that regulatory duplication across 17 areas identified by Government Accountability GAO resulted in 642 million paperwork hours, 46 billion in costs, and 990 separate reporting requirements. Pennsylvania's coal industry provides a clear example. Operators are subject to oversight from numerous federal and state entities, including EPA, OSM, MSHA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, DEP, and multiple state agencies. While each agency serves a distinct purpose, the lack of coordination often results in conflicting interpretations, duplicative requirements, and regulatory turf battles. The result is predictable: project delays, higher operating costs, and growing frustration among those required to comply. Regulations are something we all live with and are part of our daily lives. Sometimes they seem to be this mysterious force of government imposed on a helpless and unwitting population by some nameless, faceless bureaucrat hidden away in some back office, sworn to protect and serve the rules they so cleverly devise. However, the creation of regulation is far different. Despite public perception, the process of creating a regulation is itself heavily regulated. Regulations don't just happen. In fact, nearly all regulations enacted in the United States and Pennsylvania are the result of 4 different triggering events. Those events are enactment of state legislation, which is signed into law by the governor, enactment by federal legislation, which is signed into law by the president, legal challenges to a particular rule that results in establishing new case law, and federal program changes. In Pennsylvania, some regulations get their start as a part of the legislative process. The state representative or senator will introduce a bill, gets enough votes in the House and Senate to pass. If the governor signs the bill, it becomes law. But it doesn't stop there. When a bill becomes law, it will normally be assigned to the appropriate executive agency, where regulations are drafted detailing how the new law will be implemented and enforced. In Pennsylvania, those agencies include the Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Labor and Industry, Department of Community and Economic Development, and others. This is the beginning of a long and drawn-out process called rulemaking, which we will detail later in this report. Federal legislation. Similarly, U.S. Congress will pass legislation in Washington, D.C., and if the president signs the bill, then it becomes law. New law is then assigned to federal executive agency, where it comes into a long and drawn-out rulemaking process at the federal level. And eventually that will then go to the state level because the state will then be required, in most cases, to enact its own rulemaking to implement those federal regulations in the state when appropriate. Sometimes an individual organization or business will challenge the validity of a state or federal state regulation or rule in the court system. This can result in all or part of a state or federal rulemaking being upheld, modified, or eliminated entirely. When this occurs, state and federal agencies are required to amend their rules to comply with the court order. A fourth way a regulation can be implemented or amended is because a federal program changes. For example, a federal agency like the EPA or the Fish and Wildlife Services may amend a regulation due to new information, technology changes, or result of public or political pressure. Federal regulations supersede state rules. By federal statute, all regulations, including Pennsylvania's, must be at least as stringent as federal regulations. While they cannot be less stringent, a state can make a rule that is more stringent than federal requirements. While most rules in Pennsylvania are enacted to comply with federal rules, there are many rules in place that do exceed federal rules. In some cases, those stricter rules may be justified. In other cases, they may not be needed. If the federal government finds state rules are not in compliance with federal regulations, then the state could be subject to court action, loss of funding, or both. Pennsylvania's regulatory process itself is governed by 4 key state statutes. The Commonwealth Documents Law, which establishes the procedural requirements for drafting and publishing regulations. Administrative Code, which requires preparation of fiscal note by the Office of Budget. Commonwealth Attorneys Act, which mandates legal review by Office of Attorney General and a General Counsel. And Regulatory Review Act, which provides oversight by Independent Regulatory Review Commission and the General Assembly. Within this framework, Commonwealth agencies are granted the authority and responsibility to promulgate rules consistent with enabling legislations. I think I covered that, but typically regulatory actions are occurred with new legislation to align with federal rules, comply with state court, or clarify or improve existing regulation. Those triggers may be external, such as legislative or judicial or internal, but seek to improve program effectiveness. Now, the process is a 2-stage process. Many of you are going to be familiar with this. By its nature, drafting the enactment of regulation is a complex and highly structured, time-consuming process, and for good reason. From initiation to completion, it typically takes 18 to 24 months or longer. This process is divided into 2 formal phases, the proposed stage and the final stage. Although regulations may undergo months or years of internal development, the formal process does not begin until the regulatory board, such as the EQB or the Mine Safety Advisory Board, approves submission of a proposed rule. Typically, a state agency like the Department of Environmental Protection drafts the regulation in response to a statutory or political trigger, policy trigger, and submits it to the appropriate board for approval. Once approved, the proposal enters the formal process. The proposed regulation is reviewed by the Attorney General for legal sufficiency. Upon approval, it is simultaneously delivered to the standing legislative committees, the Legislative Reference Bureau, and the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. The LRB publishes the proposal in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, initiating a public comment period, generally 30 days, though this may vary. During this time, public legislative committees and IRRC may submit comments. After the comment period closes, the agency must prepare a formal response addressing all comments received. The response document is also published in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. The proposed stage probably takes about 8 to 12 months. The final stage, the agency reviews the legislation as needed, resubmits it to the regulation as needed, resubmits it to the Attorney General, legislative committees, the IRC. The IRC conducts public meetings and ultimately votes to approve or disapprove the rule. If approved, the regulation is published, final, and becomes effective. This stage generally takes another 8 to 12 months. So this is a long, drawn-out process. So, in 2017, the Pennsylvania General Assembly enacted Act 40, directing the Environmental Quality Board, the EQB, to revise the Commonwealth's manganese standard, and critically, to move the point of compliance to the point of potable water discharge. The intent was clear. Regulate manganese where it impacts the drinking water, not at the point of discharge. The subsequent rulemaking, initiated by the Department of Environmental Protection through its Bureau of Clean Water Division, went well beyond that directive. Importantly, and I need to point this out, the action was not driven by mining regulatory program, but by a separate program within the DEP with primary jurisdiction over water quality standards. However, the subsequent rulemaking initiated by the Department of Environmental Protection went well beyond the directive that the legislature proposed. Instead of limiting the charge point of compliance, the DEP proposed to do the following: reclassify manganese as a toxic substance, lower the standard from 1.0 milligrams per liter to 0.3 milligrams per liter, and apply that standard broadly at or near the point of discharge. This represented a significant expansion of regulatory scope that was neither required by federal law nor authorized by the General Assembly. The Independent Regulatory Review Commission ultimately disapproved this rule. However, despite that disapproval, the issue did not end. Under Pennsylvania's administrative code, the applicable manganese standard for mine drainage remains at 2.0. Yet in practice, the DEP continues to enforce the 1.0 per liter manganese standard. This creates a fundamental disconnect. The law says one thing, the regulation reflects another, and enforcement applies to something entirely different. The result is a system where regulation entities are held to standards that exceed both the administrative code and federal benchmarks without clear statutory authority or consent or public justification. This is not simply policy disagreement. It is a breakdown in the regulatory process itself. In conclusion, in a complex society, laws and regulations are necessary to govern our economy, property, and daily lives. They define what we can, shall, must, and may do. And when applied fairly, they protect citizens and enable society to function effectively. However, excessive regulations carries real consequences. Overlapping rules can create confusion, delay critical projects, and pose significant costs. Over time, the cumulative burden of regulations has grown substantially, costing business, citizens, and industry and trillions in inefficiencies and lost opportunity. Equally important, regulations can be shaped or applied in ways that advance specific political or social agendas. For this reason, both lawmakers and citizens must remain vigilant to ensure that regulations serve the public and not the other way around. 2 steps outlined below are intended to introduce greater transparency into the public accountability and into an already complex and time-consuming process. By shining light on overly burdensome regulations on both state and federal levels, these reforms will help restore confidence of the regulatory system to serve the people of Pennsylvania. Accordingly, I offer the following recommendations. 1. The Governor of Pennsylvania should direct all state agencies to conduct a comprehensive review of existing regulations to identify those standards which are more stringent than corresponding federal requirements. Such agencies should report its findings to the Governor and the appropriate House and Senate oversight committees. These reports should clearly justify any instances where state standards exceed federal requirements. A similar statewide review was last conducted under the administration of Governor Tom Ridge. In absence of legislative action or ongoing oversight, in the absence of or in conjunction with executive action, the General Assembly should enact legislation requiring all regulatory agencies to perform a regulatory review audit at least once every 4 years. The results of these audits should be submitted to the appropriate legislative oversight committees and made publicly available. Committees should then hold hearings to receive testimony from both regulatory agencies and stakeholders in the regulated community. Following this review process, the Governor and the General Assembly should direct agencies to align state regulations with federal standards where appropriate, unless clear and compelling justification exists for maintaining a more stringent requirement. In closing, this is not about whether we need regulations, because we do. The issue is much more how clearly and consistently are those regulations applied. As outlined in this testimony, Pennsylvania's current system has become increasingly complex with overlapping requirements, inconsistent enforcement, and in some cases standards that exceed federal law without clear justification. The recommendations we've outlined are straightforward and practical. They are designed to increase transparency, improve consistency, and ensure our regulatory system serves the public without placing unnecessary burdens on jobs and businesses. When the law says one thing, the regulation reflects another, and enforcement implies something else. That's not regulation, that's confusion. If Pennsylvania is going to compete for jobs and investment, our system must be just as strong in clarity and consistency as it is in intent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Director Fagley. That was a fantastic overview and insight into the process. I want to recognize that we have been joined online by Representative Robert Ledbetter from Columbia County in the 109th Legislative District. Thank you, Representative Ledbetter, for being here. We're going to kick it over to the members for questions. For you guys, you are welcome to answer any question. You're not obligated to answer any question. We're here to learn from you, so feel free to jump in if you have something to add. We're going to start off with Representative Dallas Kephart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the testifiers today for testifying. This is a very important issue to me. I come from Clearfield and Cambria County. I'm probably the only member in the legislature that's actually stripped coal before, and worked in the coal processing plant where we cleaned in coal. Now, I will say that we have the real coal in Clearfield County and Cambria, the bituminous coal. Not the stuff out there, the hard coal. I know, no, I'm just kidding. But I'm also the coal caucus chair in Pennsylvania, and I could go on for a long time about these issues. Mr. Fry, I must say, you are on point big time. I was texting the chairman during your statements and said, this guy gets it. You're exactly right. In 1977, we passed the Congress passed SMACRA, and they have a reclamation tax that every bituminous operator pays, anthracite pays, lignite in the Wyoming area pays, and out west they have a bunch of lignite and subbituminous out there. They all pay, and I think it's like 22 cents on the dollar now for the bituminous guys. It depends where you're at and so forth. You're right. We're the only ones that have this, tax for the sins of the past. And yet we had a congressman just north of you reauthorize it, but he's no longer there. He lost, thankfully. But bonding is such a huge issue. It's what I hear from my guys all the time and it just, it's going to go up again. So, some states have like a self-bonding mechanism essentially, and yet we're out here full cost bonding because DEP agrees to a settlement that goes to full cost bonding compared to what we used to have. But anyhow, but luckily we've had some policies of wins over the years, and maybe we can expand on them. Mike Tobash, who was a Schuylkill County native, their representative, I don't know if he took I don't know if he was before Twardzik or Kerwin. I know he represented somewhere down there, but he came up with this program around 2012 or so forth. They passed into law. It was the Land Reclamation Financial Guarantee Program. And that has been a big win for small operators doing reclamation work. It's really a win-win for everybody because, it's getting this stuff reclaimed. We have a lot of reclamation land that we use in Clearfield County. And I know you guys do in Schuylkill County as well. So, and I've approached DEP about, upping the limits on this. I mean, you guys, I keep telling them, you guys keep raising the bonding and all this, but yet you don't increase the program above, I think it's $3 million now that they can put up. It should go to 5 or 6 million, or even raise it to 4, but they won't do it. They say, oh, there's some audit and so forth. I've had a conversation with the deputy secretary himself on this issue. And you want to talk about permitting? I mean, the GFCC permits, they've sort of cracked down on those, and I don't understand why. It's basically red tape for the coal companies to go through. And the state benefits is literally reclaiming the land and improving the environment. So it's so stupid to me that we can't, come together to benefit the environment. These guys will literally reclaim the land. They're not going to walk off. They have to bond still. And they would get the coal. The environment would get cleaned up, and they can sell it. So it doesn't make any sense. But and additionally, there's no accountability with the Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP. There is zero accountability. If you challenge what they do and you win, you're out all the money that you had to litigate. As a lawyer as well, I mean, I had a friend that owns River Hill Coal Company, or did. He's starting to go out. He's about done with business, retiring. But he told me, Dallas, I can't win. I fight with my money, against my money, for my money, whenever you challenge him. And he's right, because if you win, you don't get it. Congratulations, you just spent 40 grand to win, because they're incompetent. So, and they blame OSM all the time, and then you talk to OSM and they say that's not true. So, but anyhow, I want to get to the point, and that was a good comment about the manganese as well, because I know a few years back, about the time I was getting in the legislature, there was a big fight over that, and hopefully, good thing we killed that proposal. But legislatively, Mr. Fry, I guess it's to you or whoever else wants to take the question. I mean, would that be a big improvement if we could expand the land financial guarantee program, or come up with some other alternative to the current bonding? I mean, like I said, they're going to raise the bonding rates again, and it's going to crush, especially the smaller operators, who do a lot of good work around. So I was just wondering, what legislatively do you think we could do on the bonding issue? And thank you again for your testimony. I wished I could be there. I had an event this morning to go to before, but this is an excellent topic and one I'm very passionate about.
An increase in the FGs from 3 million per company to 5 million per company would help to the tune of $2 million. Like I said, even just between the two largest operations we've got bonded now, we're $35 million. So yes, it would help. Every little bit helps. The part of that problem with that program, though, is when you release bonds, the FGs are the first bonds that have to be released. So if we've got, right now we're at our maximum exposure at $27 million, over $27 million on our one operation. As we start to reclaim, the first bond that's going to be released is the FGs. The FG program was set up to help the operators to get into full cost bonding, to make that transition. It wasn't really set up to help us to continue to survive under this bonding setup. So that would help. There is also the old LRFG program, which allows us to bond the same way through a bond that's backed by funding that the state has set aside, but it's on a specific area. There, the limit's, I think, $120,000. And hardly anybody's using it because the state is not allowing us to use that for anything now that would be reclaimed under the AML program. and they're pushing so much money out of the AML program that there's almost nothing they won't do, so there's almost nothing that we can get that bonding for. So there's ongoing challenges with those programs, and like I said, anything helps.
Yeah.
And-
So have you seen the problems with the GFCC permits cut back as well?
We've not used GFCCs in the anthracite region. With our specific operations, the GFCCs are not useful.
Okay.
I had some time with Glengarry Brick, and we were out your way, and I used GFCC permits out there. The problem with the GFCC permits is they don't allow you to conduct additional mining except for what you can show has to be done just to reclaim the feature. And here, what we're looking to do is, the anthracite coal isn't growing. We're just going deeper and deeper and deeper in the existing pits. So the GFCCs aren't useful to us here.
Okay. Well, I appreciate what you guys do, like I said, and it's in my office I have a lump of anthracite coal, so just I need you guys to keep producing it out there. It's a very high quality coal. We're one of the only places in the world that produces anthracite coal, and even though I am from the bituminous area, I'm very grateful for you guys to continue mining out there and keep employing people here in Pennsylvania. But you're right about the land reclamation. It's mostly the smaller guys that would benefit the most from that. I have a company has over $20 million in bonding out that's headquartered in my district, and that doesn't, it's going to be a small fraction for them really. But it's just keep up the good work, and if there's anything we can do in the legislature, I encourage you to reach out to me personally if you think there should be legislation introduced and so forth. Unfortunately, we have a DEP that is unaccountable and is on attack, that their mission is to put people out of business, and we are seeing it firsthand going on. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'd like just to weigh in if I could, please. Okay, thank you. Just by way of background, as far as you mentioned the Land Reclamation Financial Guarantee Program, that program actually had its genesis up here in the anthracite coal mining region. Just by way of background, back in 2000, as Sean said, they went from what was called an alternate bonding system, where they put the money into a bond pool. They paid into a bond pool, and then if there was a forfeiture or something like that, then the money would come out of that bond pool. That was insufficient. There was a lawsuit back in late 90s, 1999. It was resolved, and so at that point in time, then the state went into what was called a full cost bonding system. So the operators were then compelled by the state to bond their own sites individually. So that's what happened. And the thing that drove that was a lawsuit by an organization called Penn Future. You're probably familiar with Penn Future. And what they were saying is that there were some abandoned pre-act sites out in the western part of the state, significantly number of large abandoned sites with water treatment issues out in the western part of the state. And the state was now obligated to treat those sites out there. Okay, so now the courts have said you got to treat this stuff. Legislature did not appropriate any money for the state to treat the stuff, for the department to treat the stuff. So there's no money there. So what we did was, and this was, and I'm going to say that so we generated this generated from our organization, from our industry. I proposed at that point in time, working with a gentleman by the name of Bill Allen with the department. I said, look, the state, in order to help the operators go from the alternate bonding system to the full cost bonding system, the state set aside $7 million, which they said they could write $70 million worth of bond on. So that was set up, and they could buy into that system. So they're paying a point and a half every year. And as some of the companies are dropping off and they're using it. So now this point and a half now has come up in around 2008. Now instead of having $7 million set aside in the system, you have $10 million in there, approximately, something like that, going by memory. So by around 2012, now we're up to around $13 million in the system. And it's just sitting there. And nobody can do anything with it. So what we suggested was, we said, look, you've got an obligation out in the western part of the state to treat those discharges out there. But the legislature hasn't given you any money to appropriate to do it. You've got the responsibility to do it, so you got to do it. So what we said was, look, why don't we do this? Let's set up a bonding system. We got $13 million in there. Let's set up a program whereby the operators can buy into the system. And the interest that's drawn off of it and some of the premiums can be used to help treat those systems out in the western part. This was a fantastic program, and it still is. This is a fantastic program. When we got together with the department agreed to that. We agreed to the law the way it was. We wrote it out. It was submitted. It passed the House 203 to 1 or 202 to 1. It passed the Senate unanimously. The thing of it, and this program has worked very good for the last 2 decades. Now, what's happened? We've entered into a period of extraordinary circumstances. And we all know what that is. We see the inflation that's taking place right now. It's out of control. That's beyond the control of the department. That's beyond the control of the industry. That's beyond the control of everybody in this room. So what do? Well, we got to figure out what we can do next. And there's something that we need to do next. We have approached the department on this. I will tell you this. We have an excellent working relationship with the mining program down in Harrisburg, with Nate and Reg and Randy Schustak. Excellent working relationship with them. We have talked to them about this issue. It's not an easy issue to resolve. It's just not. If it were that easy to resolve, we would have had it resolved by now. But the thing about the department is they're willing to engage with us on this issue. We are having some conversations up this way with them. We expect to meet with them early next month to discuss and find some ways that we can alleviate some of this pressure. There are some things that we're talking about, not at liberty to talk about them now because they're just kind of ideas at this point in time. But we are working with the department on this, and they're aware of what we're going through with this. So I just say that is that the industry has been working with us. My experience with the department is different than, say, Sean's or yours, because I operate with them on a different level. I don't deal with them on the enforcement level as you guys do. So my experience with them is certainly a lot different than yours, and I am empathetic towards your cause. So I just want to give you that background information.
Thank you. Representative Barton.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Rep. Kephart.
I was just going to say, I will say Randy Schustak has been good to work with on issues. And I would just mention the AL thing. I forgot to say this real quick. You have to be a third part or a nonprofit to get the funds that the coal companies had paid in to reclamate the areas according to the IIJA, which is the most dumbest
BIL, that's
thing.
correct, yeah.
Yeah, it's completely stupid because then they can't do it anyhow, the massive projects. But anyhow, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Barton.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your testimony this morning. I'd like to direct my questions to Mr. Williams and Mr. Fry. Ms. Desiker and Mr. Fegley, I'll get back to you, but specifically we talk about and the regulatory environment in Pennsylvania in this industry. And let me ask you a question. I'm going to spitfire a couple questions at you, and I'll ask you to respond if you're comfortable. Let me just start. Do you know any miners by name, their families? Do you know a lot? Do you know a couple?
I know just about all of them. And I've been in the business like I started out with for almost 50 years and stuff. I did almost every aspect of mining that you could talk about. One of the specific things I did was deep mining and surveying of the deep mines and preparing deep mine permits. So I got to know most of them.
Okay,
and the other thing about that is it's kind of unique ethnic-wise and stuff, because back in 1963 there was almost 800 anthracite deep mines at that time. When I graduated from Penn State as a mining engineer in 1980, there was 180. Now we're down to about 3 or 4. And most of those mines are right locally here in our area and stuff. Even though there's so many districts in the anthracite region, they're locally. So yes, I personally know almost all of them.
Let me ask you a question. Mr. Fry, you're nodding your head as well. Do you know how many, just think how many generations you know? Do you know anybody with that have multiple generations, any families of 2 generations, maybe 3 generations?
Absolutely. Actually, there's some families that go back 7 generations.
7 generations.
In my family and stuff, my forefather was 5 generations, came from Wales as an anthracite miner to the anthracite region to begin the anthracite industry underground.
And Mr. Fry, you're nodding your head as well, of knowing multiple.
My great-great-grandfather, I didn't even grow up in the anthracite region, but my great-great-grandfather is on the Pennsylvania Monument down at Gettysburg. Captain Richard Budd was grew up, well, emigrated from Ireland, grew up near new mines, and cut all the timber for the deep mines.
And would you say that the employees, the miners, and I'm talking about people that have the boots on the ground, literally, live close by? Do they travel far to work?
No, absolutely. They're probably within maybe 30 miles or less of where their mines are to where their homes are at.
Now, this might get a little bit more difficult to answer. Do any of these guys hunt?
A lot of them.
Most of them, yes.
Most of them? 75%, 80%?
At least
I'd say
75.
that's probably about in the right range.
Right. Do any of them fish?
A lot of them. I know a lot of our guys do.
Do they breathe the air?
All of them.
They drink the water? So when we talk about the environmental stewardship, we have for multiple generations people raising their family close by to their work that breathe the air, drink the water, raise their families, fish, hunt. Do they recreate? Are they outdoors people, would you say?
Absolutely.
So is there a better steward of the environment than the coal miner, the anthracite coal miner, would you say?
No, there's not a better steward.
I
Because they're
agree with
attached to the land. They grew up here. Their families, their forefathers grew up here and stuff. They're attached to the land. They want to see good out of it and stuff.
And yet all these regulatory nonsensical. Yes, we all agree there needs to be guide rails, but these nonsensical environmental regulations, particularly on the anthracite industry, don't make sense, particularly when we look at what the coal miners are. Let me go to a different area now, and that is separate regulations, and I'll throw this out to the whole panel. Pennsylvania is the 14th highest regulatory state in the United States of America. We have 22% more regulations than the average state here in Pennsylvania. As coal miners in general are businessmen, right? But they're also engineers. They're plumbers. They're electricians. They are carpenters, mechanics, welders, environmental engineers, equipment operators, truck drivers. But they're often not lawyers. I think Representative Kephart might be the only one. And when we take a look at the regulations, it's hard to sift through and understand them. I want to share one with you that happened yesterday, because I could go on and on about this as well, and I'd just like you to expand on this as well. So not necessarily this, but the regulatory environment that affects miners in all different ways. I got a phone call from a constituent, a mining company yesterday, who you all know, that was moving a piece of equipment from Texas to Pennsylvania. It left Texas on April 1st. It got to the Pennsylvania on April 13th and has been sitting there since. Now, it came through with every permit. This company moves. It's a huge drill. It's moved equipment. It came from the manufacturer on a regular basis, right? Came through every other state, no problem, from April 1st with a police escort. Got to Pennsylvania, it's sitting there. It's still sitting there till I got involved and had to ruffle some feathers, and it's moving now again today, I'm told. My question is, that's not really a mining regulation, but it just shares the difficulty in regulatory environment in Pennsylvania that affects all of us. Are there other, Ms. Dessiger, you talked about the coal and non-coal. I don't think you were referring to transportation when you spoke of that. But can you expand on how difficult and how just abrasive and abusive the regulatory environment is here in Pennsylvania?
Let me share a story with you, too. In the anthracite deep mining business, you said we're mostly plumbers and different things, but not lawyers and stuff. One day I went to a deep mining site, and the foreman was carrying a briefcase, and I asked him if he had turned into a lawyer. He said not, but he said he had to be certified in so many things that he needed a briefcase just to carry all his certifications around. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, I think one other thing that's real important to point out, you talk about just how tough it is with these regulations. If we look at what Dave talked about, and Dave's talking about all the problems that he sees with the implementation of the environmental justice, which isn't even a regulation, it's an executive order. But if we look at the anthracite region specifically, we should be exempted entirely. Because the purpose of the environmental justice, the whole setup, was to try to stop this system where the things like chemical plants and warehouses were all getting put into places where the poorer people lived that didn't have the ability to fight about it. The AI places and stuff that are going in Maria and other places around the anthracite region, they could be put in Martha's Vineyard if somebody had the desire to make that fight. We can't mine anthracite coal there. We can mine it in the 13 counties where it exists, where it's been mined for 250 years. We're not contributing to an environmental or an injustice to any of these residents. We're contributing to some of the highest salaries in this region. And yet we're subject to an executive order that shouldn't even apply to us. We should be exempted entirely.
Thank you all. And again, thank you for your testimony. Thanks for supporting this incredible industry.
Representative Twardzik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your excellent testimony. Very informative. I'm glad I'm not a minor. It's an awful tough job to take. Recently I'm on the environmental committee, and we had a hearing down in Chester regarding environmental justice. And it was a lot of angry people because of a paper factory and because of a waste incinerator. And they're complaining that we don't want this in our community and it's harmful. But they said we need to just send all this trash from Philadelphia into landfills. And at the meeting, I just said, well, I was at a meeting last night, and I have a community that says we don't want all the Philadelphia trash in our landfill. So, who are we fighting with? But, executive orders are bad. Again, they take away the legislative process that we were elected by the people in our communities to support. So we try to fight those every day. Question, the state of Oklahoma eliminated the underground mine safety program, and that's been about 4.5 years. Has there been a giant upheaval? Are mines unsafe in Oklahoma, or are they still fine?
They looked at their own agency, and they said MSHA is doing just as good or better of a job. As we talked about, their laws are more stringent than state laws. So they looked at it, and why should they put in their budget millions of dollars when the federal government is doing exactly the same thing? And as far as I know, they've been well pleased with the program so far.
Okay, well, I appreciate you bringing it up to us. Perhaps that's something we can deal with a little later on to try to figure out, let's be efficient in our businesses. And if we can save the state's money, we could put it, there's an awful lot of other places in this budget they want to spend it. So we'd be happy to have it back. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Representative Ledbetter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Panelists, thank you so much for your testimony this morning, and Representative Stehr, thank you so much for your leadership in this space. It's always insightful to gain valuable insight into this industry in particular, is how important it is to the Commonwealth. Mr. Chairman, if I may, my question is better suited post context. So for the testifier's benefit, I'll provide some context. Oftentimes, we can be blinded by our own familiarity with the industries that we traffic in, and I know I'm guilty of that with the legislative process. Chairman Rowe and my colleagues here often speak of some of the common actions that take place in Harrisburg that are significant to us, but without proper context, our constituents simply don't appreciate or grasp the significance of it. And that's not a fault to them. It's simply a lack of familiarity, because it is not what they do day in and day out. In a similar manner, I have ignorance into industries that I'm not familiar with. So with that in mind, my background, gentlemen, is that of a commodities background. I worked for a beer company prior to coming to the State House, and it would not confuse anyone if there was an over-regulation on hop cones or the cereals needed to produce beer, if that translated then into a reduced amount of volume within the marketplace, as well as a significant increase in price on those products. Because people know that hop cones and cereals are used to make beer. When people talk about coal is integral to significant areas of production that cannot be substituted in any other way. Pennsylvania has a independent trade office with the country of Taiwan, and in conversations with some of their elected officials, they were boasting to me about how their public transit infrastructure had converted to 100% electric buses. And when I asked them how they were able to increase energy production to be able to run those electric buses, they, without hesitation, told me that they increased their coal imports. And so, with the idea of familiarity sometimes being our own worst enemy, can you guys share with us, for the record, and so also to the benefit of our constituents back home, some of the things that we as Pennsylvanians and just as regular citizens use every day that don't get to exist without coal?
Mr. Chairman, I'll weigh in on that if you don't mind. Thank you. That's a good observation. We appreciate that. There are some subtle differences between anthracite and bituminous. Bituminous coal is mostly used for steam coal, and they'll coke it for carbon. Mostly, it's a steam coal for electric generation. Anthracite coal, to the best of my knowledge, there's nobody using anthracite to generate electricity anymore. That mostly anthracite now used for steel manufacturing, water filtration, sugar beet manufacturing. Those are some of the big areas. Home heating market too as well is still there, and in the space heating market, it's still very popular in the space heating market too as an effective fuel. So, and back to your other question. Then I kind of lost track of that question. What? Could you go back?
That's exactly the feedback that I was looking for, Mr. Chairman. Because if we talk about how we want to be good stewards of the environment, we just heard the testifier say that water filtration is something that occurs because of anthracite coal. When we hear the Shapiro administration speak to the need for investment in infrastructure, whether that be our turnpike or our public transit systems across the different urban centers within Pennsylvania, the steel that's required to build those bridges and create those thoroughfares don't happen without anthracite coal. And the testifier, I outlined several other examples, but I think it's very clear that while people have familiarity with the word coal, whether that's because of proximity to a community like Representative Stehr's, or if it's because of a Christmas carol, the reality is that coal means so much more than the thing that we mine out of the ground that we all have in our head as this black shiny object that we can use. It's actually integral to the success and prosperity of our Commonwealth and our communities. And so, again, I appreciate the testimony this morning, and Chairman, for you putting this together, and Representative Stehr for your leadership. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Representative Ledbetter. I got two quick questions of my own before I... Oh, go ahead.
If I could,
Yes,
just
of course.
throw something out real quick. Both Dave and I have mentored the Mining and Society Merit Badge with Boy Scouts. And I don't know about Dave, but one of the first things I tell these guys is if you don't grow it, you mine it.
That's right.
Everything that we have in our life, if you don't grow it, you mine it. It is a product of mining. I think that's important because I don't think most people realize that. But one other, just a random fact that I think most people don't realize is that our warships were fueled with anthracite in World War I because it burns so clean that it didn't put out any smoke. And out on the ocean, smoke coming out of a stack on a warship can be seen for 1,000 miles. We still burned anthracite in some of our warships in World War II and even into Vietnam. Almost all of the pre-act mining features that exist in the anthracite, aside from the drainage tunnels, which were a result of the underground mining. But most of the stuff we see on the surface was not reclaimed during those three periods, World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War, because all of our men were at war. All of our women were working in the factories, and the men that were left behind to do the mining, the government did not want them committing the manpower or the resources to reclaiming. They wanted them mining the coal. So there's so much history that comes into where we are now that people don't even realize. And I think it's important to keep that. Dave does programs. I'll let you tell him.
Okay. He's spot on. There's actually a YouTube video I would encourage you guys to look at and stuff that was done during World War II, where the federal government created a commission and came to the anthracite region, and they did programs in Mount Carmel, Hazleton, Wilkes-Barre, and Scranton to encourage the anthracite region to produce 10 million more tons of anthracite coal. It was for the war. They even came out with 50 posters showing servicemen right next to coal miners. Their federal government came with this committee and they visited the coal mines and went down into the coal mines to have a look at it and encourage it and stuff. Our ships were burning that bituminous coal, and it was letting a lot of smoke, and the Germans were seeing the smoke and able to torpedo our boats. We lost a lot of boats in World War II. We converted to anthracite, but they needed more anthracite to fuel their boats. So we helped a lot, but it also impacted our environment here and stuff, because the story was, we need to win the war. We need to win the war. So our boys here did that. Also, the encouragement of more tonnage. Canada was cut off from their fuel support over in Europe. So they were also looking, where can we replace our coal that we can't get anymore from the European countries? So our miners, our companies, our collieries and stuff stepped up to the task, and they produced that 10 million more tons of coal during World War II. And somehow that fact got lost in history and stuff like that. And we've got the black eye now because of the pre-act pits that were created during that period of time, even though the federal government encouraged us to do it. So,
And we pay the tax to clean it up.
Chairman, if I may.
Of course.
I'll just share with you that in my office in the Capitol, when you walk in, you'll see a sign that's it's a replication of a World War II poster, World War I poster that says, "Support our boys in the foxholes, mine more coal." And it's a picture depicted of a soldier standing next to a coal miner. And candidly, when we go to Bethlehem and we see what used to be Bethlehem Steel, which is now a casino and restaurants, it breaks my heart to see that what literally beat the Germans, beat the Japanese in World War II. Is now come to that. But we have an administration now focused on building our military, making American steel again, and again, anthracite's at the forefront, and we need to support it. So I just wanted to make a comment on that. Thank you again.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak for a moment?
Sure.
If I could? Sure. One of the things that I'd like to talk about, I didn't bring it up in my comments because my comments were specifically going to be addressed to regulations, because that's something that you can impact, like tomorrow when you go back to Harrisburg, when you get back there. That's something you guys can do. But we do have an issue that we're wrestling with now in Washington, D.C., and that is with the unfair importation of Peruvian anthracite. We're seeing significant tonnages of Peruvian anthracite coming into the country right now. And most of the anthracite right now is going to anthracite. The electric steel industry is 70% of all steel is produced in what's called an electric arc furnace. Okay, so they use electricity and anthracite. And anthracite's the primary fuel for that. They can use some other fuels for that. They can use some other sort, and carbon. It's just not a fuel, so it's a carbon. Anthracite's the primary source of carbon for that. They can use some others, but using other sources of carbon becomes problematic. So they like the anthracite better for that reason. So we see this Peruvian anthracite coming into the country. Last year, 184,000 tons of anthracite came in from Peru, and it doesn't sound like a lot of tonnage because America produces 500 million tons of coal a year. Well, there's a difference between bituminous coal and anthracite. Anthracite, they're producing probably about 2 million tons to be sold into the market every year, and I have the numbers, I can back that up. So between 1.6 and 2.1 million tons annually is what we sell into the marketplace in prepared product. And what we're seeing is that about 1 million tons, between 1.1 and 1.3 million tons a year of this product is going into the electric arc furnace marketplace. What we're seeing, though, is Peru, and previously before that Russia, were coming in and displacing a lot of our tonnages into that marketplace significantly. And what we're seeing here in Peru is a couple of things. With Peru, our cost, this is kind of interesting. The cost of equipment, you got to figure that the cost of equipment, a piece of equipment to go down to Peru, and our energy costs, there are 4 components for production for anthracite coal. It's going to be labor, equipment, energy, and environmental reclamation. Now, our energy costs and our equipment costs should be about the same, you would think. A truck's going to be a truck. A shovel's going to be a shovel. So the costs are going to be the same. But what we're seeing Peruvian anthracite coming into the country at significantly less prices and dropping, I will say. Last year, at the end of last year, they were selling their anthracite at the pier in Peru for roughly $95 to $100 a ton. That's cheaper than we can produce it. And you're talking about $20-$30 a ton to deliver it to port. We can't keep up with it. We cannot manage and keep up with those prices. We cannot do that. And so, what's the difference? Okay, so if our energy costs are going to be about the same, and our equipment costs and purchases are going to be about the same, then what's the difference then between the two? Well, the differences are going to be labor costs, and the difference are going to be environmental reclamation costs, bonding, and putting the stuff back, and our labor costs. That says to me that that right now the government's investigating unfair labor practices in the country of Peru. We have filed comments with the U.S. Trade Representative to that effect last week, and hopefully we're going to have a chance to go down there and testify before the Trade Representative in a few weeks too, as well, to this aspect. So there are some other issues that are going on here within the industry. I didn't bring them up here because it didn't seem germane to what you could do for us, but I want to bring it up now just as a matter of information for you.
Thank you. And I got 2 quick questions before I turn it over to Rep. Stehr for any closing remarks. And I know we're coming up on time here, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet. Director Fagley, right on that point of costs, your statistic here that you referenced, the duplicative regulatory cost of $46 billion. And that's something that we've seen regulations across the board, right, that cost billions of dollars. We've talked a lot about affordable health care on this committee. The American Hospital Association put out a report that said the regulations cost them $39 billion annually. $39 billion, and we want to wonder why health care costs more and more when they're spending $39 billion just on paperwork to comply. And those aren't necessarily safety regulations. Those are regulations that tell you where you can put a TV in a conference room, but that still costs money to comply with. So a very simple question. Those regulatory costs, who bears those burdens? And when it comes to the fact that you have those sort of regulations that are inconsistent across agencies. We had a great child care hearing a couple of weeks ago where the same child care provider, when under the jurisdiction of the Department of Education, has one regulation governing the temperature of the room the kid's in. When it switches to the Department of Human Services, there are now 8 regulations that govern temperature for the room for the same facility. So when we're looking at, I realize these are federal numbers that we're talking about, but clearly the state has some overlapping issues when it comes to duplicative regulations. $46 billion in costs. Who's bearing that cost? Who foots that bill?
The consumer does, plain and simple. They're going to pass that on to their customers. They have to. I mean, they can't operate, a business can't operate at a loss. So those costs have to be passed on to the consumer. That's the only way to operate. Otherwise, they're out of business.
And I think that's an important thing to note, because when people, if you're not in the business, you don't see the regulations. If you're a consumer, you just see the end cost. And we wonder why things cost more and more. But when $46 billion just meeting the duplicative requirement, not even all the requirements, just the ones that are duplicative, that money is coming straight out of the pockets of the ratepayers. My second question, again, I'll be quick. Mr. Williams, you referenced something that harkened me back to a policy hearing we did up with the oil and gas industry in the northwestern part of the state, talking about them capping orphan wells. And the administration has touted how they've capped a couple dozen orphan wells, and that's great. But at the same time, the industry has capped exponentially more wells than that on their own, at their own dime, and they don't get any credit for it. So your point that the mining contributes significantly to environmental remediation by reclaiming mine lands and improving water quality at no cost to taxpayers, that's great. But do you get any credit from the government, either state or federal, for that work?
No, not really. We're affording the whole bill and stuff. It's our industry to try to mine coal, sell the coal, but as part of the process, we have to reclaim it. Our permits here in Anthracite are considered mining and reclamation. So there's no credit for what we're filling in. We're just able to say what he had said, that we reclaimed, what was it, 2.7 million acres of ground because we want to mine coal.
So you're paying on the front end for the permits and any sort of the bonding, all that you're paying on the front end, but on the back end, when you're doing the good work, not even a thank you.
Yeah, can I just jump in here real quick too? I think that Dave and Sean make a good point here in particular, but the last numbers I saw, and I got these numbers way back, and it would be really nice if we could get some more accurate numbers from the department. There are probably some ways that we could do that, but everything up in the Anthracite coal mining region was called reclamation remining. Everything we do, we're going in and we're reaffecting an area that was previously mined decades, in some cases centuries ago, extracting the mineral from it, and then reclaiming that land and reclaiming the surface for use. I think the last numbers I saw, and I'm just going anecdotally, I saw it was like 2016. I got some number from the department of somewhere around these aren't going back to 77. These are going back from the 1980s through to like 2012. Some 20,000 acres of land, surface land, had been reclaimed through mining, remining. That was 20,000 acres. At the same time, I'm just, don't hold me to these numbers, but it would probably less than half that. The BAMR, the Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation, had probably claimed up here in this way. What happens is you get an operator there, if they're mining, and Sean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on any of this and jump in. But when they mine the coal, they'll get a swell factor in the coal, okay, and the rock and material they'll point out. So they're going to have excess spoil. So a lot of times when an operator does, there will be an adjacent pit. Now, what happens is, just guys for a second, there's the OSM has three categories of pits. There's P1 priority 1 pit, which is a imminent threat to danger, health and safety. P2, which is slightly under that, then a P3, which is not considered an imminent threat to health and safety, likely never to be reclaimed. So what happens, a lot of these operators are operating near these P3 sites. And they got to put the material somewhere, so they put it in there. They reclaim those holes. Those are holes that aren't going to be reclaimed by anybody else ever. But now, on top of that, then, and Sean, jump in with if I'm correct on this, then the department says, okay, you want to put that pit, you can do that. Now you're going to bond that pit as well. And you're doing them a favor. That pit was just sitting there empty. Now you're going to bond that pit. And you got to bond that pit and reclaim it. You got to not only you got to bond it, now you got to plant it and reclaim it. We get no credit for that at all. There should be, back in the 90s, they had maybe a handful of remining incentives that were useful. And I'll put myself, in the crosshairs on this. It's time for us to sit down with the department again and talk to them about developing some remining incentives, and then maybe we come to the legislature with that. But then again, that's on us. That's not on you. That's not on anybody else. I take that on myself. And so I think once we get some of these other issues done we've been dealing with, we also need to talk about some remining incentives, because we did have them in the past. They were useful, and they helped operators along. So I think that's something that we need to talk about as well in the future.
And were those incentives exclusively federal, or were those state or both?
Those are state, mostly state. Yeah, they were state. And they weren't really that great. They would give you some money to help with engineering costs if you're a small operator. That was beneficial. The GFCC was and still is considered, I think, a remining incentive, but nobody uses it. The FG's bonds were probably, they were always considered that, but nobody, they're not meaningful. We need to come up with something meaningful, something of substance. And the other thing too is at some point in time, I think these operators should get a credit if they're reclaiming a strip pit that's adjacent to theirs, and then they're being charged $30 million or $20 million to bond this site over here. They should be able to get some credit for the land that they've reclaimed. I think it's only common sense. They do bond trading, they do carbon trading credits. Why can't we do some land trading credit? It's a system that have to be looked at, but those are some things that maybe we could look at.
The biggest problem is that the district office does not have the personnel or the time, or actually, in a lot of cases, the experience to evaluate that, put a dollar amount to it, and even put a process into place to work with the operators on that stuff.
Go ahead.
And another quick clarification, the 20,000 acres he threw out, my number's at 236,000 to 2.7 million acres is nationwide. The numbers he's referring to are
Just for
anthracite,
just for
but
Pennsylvania.
it's the same kind of relationship there to what the state is reclaiming under the federal program and what the operators are reclaiming.
And I think the other thing too is within the department, I think, and this is not a slam against the personnel that are there, okay? But they've had significant retirements in the mining program. This mining program started back in the 80s, and there are people there for 20, 30, 40 years. Now those people are retiring and they're moving on and they're bringing in new people. You don't replace that kind of experience overnight. It just doesn't happen like that. And the only way to get that experience is to get that experience. And so we're having to work through some of those issues too, because they're still trying to learn the process, how it goes there. And you know, we had a department, you know, 5-10 years ago, that when OSM would come in and try to impose enforcement on a regulation, the department would push back when they felt that was when OSM was not doing that. You don't see that so much anymore. And that's not a negative thing. It's just a lack of experience thing. And that's not, I'm not being critical. That's just the way it is. And I think some of these things, I hear people saying, well, the department's trying to run us out of business. I don't think the department's trying to run us out of business. I do not think that for 1 second. Never have, never will. I think that you have some people in there that are good, that intended well, who may be overzealous in some areas. But I do think that part of this perception might be because there's a lack of experience there. And that's a big part of it.
That's from the director on down.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and these are, look, I work with these guys on a regular basis. They're good guys. They're good to work with. They'll sit down and they'll talk to us. I mean, we have had such a good relationship with the department in the Harrisburg level for many, many years. They just won't, and if we had questions, we want a meeting, they'll sit down and we'll talk. And we've had our differences with them, don't get me wrong. You know, a number of years ago, Sean, you'll recall this, we were meeting, you know, regular basis. We would sit down, we would meet in the morning, break for lunch, and come back in the afternoon. And it was not always a pleasant conversation. But over time, I would get back in the 90s, early 2000s, I was getting just crushed with phone calls complaining about the department. You know when the last time was I got a phone call complaining about the department? I can't remember the last time I got a phone call complaining about the department. I don't get them anymore, because we've worked through a lot of these issues. There are issues at the enforcement level. That's the truth, okay? I typically don't get involved with those. If it's an enforcement issue that's affecting all the operators, then typically I'll get involved in it. But if it's a site-specific issue, very rarely that I would get involved with that.
Well, thank you guys very much. I'm going to turn it to Representative Stehr for any closing remarks, questions.
No, I did have a question. Do you feel the laws and the guidelines are more favorable to bituminous versus anthracite?
I'm going to say we have separate regulations for anthracite. We have separate regulations for bituminous. So they do recognize a difference. I don't see that it's unfair because we're in two different market spaces.
Right.
Okay, we're in two different market spaces. I've never had anybody come up to me and complain that the bituminous gets a better deal than we do. That's never ever happened.
Well, I've had somebody say that to me, so that's why I asked that question, because even like with workman's compensation.
Well, yeah, we have a separate workers' comp program. Yeah, that's true. Okay, that is true. Okay, yes. But we've lived with that for 30 years that I've been here, so it's probably before that, since before I got here. So yeah, we do have separate workers' comp programs. And the thing with the anthracite is that because you have a smaller smaller labor pool to pull from.
Right.
Your rates are going to go up. You know,
Right.
if you got 1,000 workers and you have a $500,000 claim, and that's spread over 1,000 workers, as opposed to say, well, in that case it's probably 5,000. In our case, it's 1,000. Then that's going to be it affects the rates, and that's just an actuarial issue. And
Well, it's just unless you're an anthracite coal miner or deep coal miner, it's just but
well,
that's what's
the
important
deep mines
to
have
me.
it the worst of the worst. The anthracite deep mines
exactly.
again, it's the same situation because you've got 3 mines out there, and you probably got maybe I don't know how many people think are paying into the Black Lung Fund and the Workers' Comp Fund. Probably not many.
Probably
There's
one.
one company.
Yeah, one company. Yeah.
Exactly.
So there's one. So there's the issue you're running into. Probably the solution there would be to blend the anthracite into the bituminous. I just stuck off the top of my head. So you've only got one mine, maybe to blend them in with the bituminous operators because it would not affect their rates as much. I wouldn't think, but I don't know. I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
But I'm really thinking that the whole regulatory state versus federal needs a complete overhaul. You know, somebody going in there and somebody who still has that mindset and experience and knows about mining, I think can make a huge difference because we have a lot of people who came to work for the department here or department there who really don't have that mindset or that experience like a good coal miner does.
Right.
And how it's going to affect them. So the stakeholders who are involved with any kind of procedures or moving forward or statutes that we want to even legislatively try to enhance. The good news is anthracite coal is on a comeback. We've got plenty of it.
But we do.
And what we want to do is make it as easy as we possibly can to try to keep Pennsylvania to remain competitive with that anthracite coal.
Yeah, I
So-
appreciate that because I think you nailed the heart of what it is. And I'm glad you raised the point about the bituminous because a lot of people do confuse that a little bit. And there are some differences in there.
Yeah.
And we have, quite frankly, we have some regulations that they don't have to deal with. It's pretty much a wash in my opinion because I've heard of the anthracite and the bituminous operators complaining about us too. So
Right.
so it
Well,
happens.
you
I'd
know,
like
to
to get
be.
in here somewhere.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dave.
You mentioned something here. Our anthracite industry goes back over 200 years. That's a lot of mining, but what people don't understand is basically for every 1 ton of coal that's been mined already, there's 3 out there. Can you only imagine a farmer that has 4 fields and he farmed 1 field, but he's not allowed to farm the other 3?
Right.
That's how much coal we have here yet. We didn't even get to half of it yet.
Right.
And we want to, but we're not there.
Well, we certainly need anthracite coal, and whether it be for heating, which maybe not so much of anymore, but for the steel industry, for the clean burning coal, for the energy aspect, whatever we're going to be using it for, certainly we want to make the regulations a lot cleaner and a lot favorable to the coal miners. And regulations that are obsolete should be just that, taken out of the works and come up with a clean start. Let's go this way with the federal and try to mesh that together that we have a clearer understanding that maybe we wouldn't necessarily need all that bonding and everything else like that or that reclamation if we kind of just got together and sat down and worked together on something like this. So thank you all very much for your testimony. I appreciate you, our visitors, as well as my fellow representatives coming into the neighborhood as well as on TV. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it. Certainly enjoy. We have a little luncheon back there. Certainly grab a sandwich and some fruit, a drink. And thank you again for coming to our beautiful 107th district. Thank you.
Well, we certainly appreciate the time to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dwayne.
Thank you, Representative Stehr. I will say Representative Stehr is definitely a tenacious advocate in Harrisburg. Her constituents are very lucky to have her. I think we've heard today an argument not against regulation, but a need for balance, for clarity, consistency, because we understand regulations do serve an important purpose, but when they are layered, inconsistent, duplicative, they create real challenges and clearly drive up costs on consumers. It's not an issue that's unique to anthracite. We're hearing similar themes across industries from childcare to healthcare, which tells us this is something that we really need to address in a thoughtful and meaningful way. We've heard how improving coordination, updating processes, creating more flexibility can really unlock innovation, support efficiency, and strengthen our communities. And that's the opportunity that's in front of us today to ensure our regulatory system both protects the public while also being able to support the growth of the legacy industries of Pennsylvania. If Pennsylvania is going to compete, for jobs, investment, economic growth. We need a system that's transparent, predictable, that works in practice, and that's exactly the type of thing that this committee is advancing. So we're going to be talking more about the regulatory environment on our next hearing in Blair County on April 30th, talking more about affordable childcare. Until then, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you all for being here.
One more thing. Oh,
Go for it.
I just also want to know, Jamie shared with us that Governor Josh Shapiro, who has now agreed to keep open the two beautiful clean coal plants in Indiana and Armstrong County. It's a huge step forward, and maybe we can progress from that and get that back up and running all over the place. It's just kind of a light at the end of the tunnel to say all this negative that we put up with and shut it down and everything else like that. This is a light at the end of the tunnel. This is big news. And thank you, Jamie, for sharing that with us. And thank you all for working towards to make everybody aware that this is important to our Pennsylvania and our coal mining industry. So thank you.
And if you'd like to learn more about the anthracite industry, please stop by Ashland, Pennsylvania. The exciting Pioneer Mine Tour is open for the season, and it actually takes you into the mountain, and you find out where our forefathers mined these black diamonds. But it's very educational. Our students go there. But if you haven't been there in a while, you should come back, because it's really important to find out what these people did for a living to win the world wars, to do the Industrial Revolution. And thanks for coming.